Plaintiff A and B have resided in and jointly on a 3-story bungalow in Subang Jaya, Selangor since 2018. In March 2025, the adjacent lot owned by Defendant 1 and 2 underwent demolition and reconstruction, replacing an older structure with a new 2-story superstructure. Shortly after work began, plaintiff noticed extensive damage to their property, including visible cracks in the wall and a substantial hole in the garden. They promptly lodged complaints and initiated legal proceedings, naming the property owners the architect Defendant 3, the independent contractor Defendant 4, and the civil engineering Defendant 5, in a negligence claim. Expert evidence confirmed that the structural damage was directly caused by the contractor and engineer's action, and further indicated that the landowners had failed to adequately supervise the work or correct the resulting defects. The case now turns on two critical tort issues. First, whether the landowners own a non-delegable duty of care, an obligation that cannot be passed off to contractors, especially in light of Malaysian authorities such as Hemraj and Co. v. TNB, which limits this duty to extremely hazardous activities. And second, whether all parties involved should be treated as joint tortfeasors, sharing liability for the indivisible harm suffered by the plaintiff.
What is tortious liability? Tortious liability arises when someone commits a wrongful act that causes harm to another person. The law holds them legally responsible for that harm. This is a part of a civil law, not a criminal law, and the main aim is not to punish but compensate the victim. Some common examples of tort include negligence, defamation, and also trespass. In each of these cases, the victim doesn't need to prove the criminal intent. They just need to show that they are suffered from the harm because of another person's actions. In summary, tortious liability is about holding a people accountability for their wrongful action and ensuring the affected party is received justice through the compensation.
Non-delegible duty of care, so a legal responsibility where a person or organization cannot transfer their duty of care to another party, and ensuring safety or care of others, even if someone else performed the task on your behalf, like employer to contractor or engineer.
Next is joint tortfeasor. What is joint tortfeasor? They are two or more individuals who commit a tort together and cause harm to another person. In such cases, they are said to share the joint liability. This means that the injured party has the right to sue any one of them or all of them together for the full amount of the damages. The responsibility is shared, but the law allows the affected person to claim the full compensation from any one of the wrongdoers. Then the party who paid can seek a contribution of indemnity from the other tortfeasor. This principle ensures that the victims are not left without the compensation just because one of the tortfeasor cannot pay. It's about securing a justice and accountability.
Moving to the issue ones. So, what's the issues? Whether liability should be confined to the initial two defendants based on the existence of a non-delegible duty of care. The solution is no. Liability should not be limited to the one defendant and second defendant. The other defendant should also be liable in the negligence to the plaintiff.
For explanation, first, both first and second holds under strict liability because employers were found to be negligent, oversee, supervise the acts or omission of independent contractor. Moreover, employer also fails to exercise due care in the selection of independent contractor, and employer also can found liable where the works involved are particularly hazardous in nature, giving rise to strict liability. Second, both first and second holds under strict liability because having held as such, the independent could not be completely exempted from liability even if the employer had a common law or strict liability. bear all the responsibility. This is because there is evidence showing that the damage suffered by a plaintiff was caused by the act and omission of the fourth and fifth defendant, where both defendants failed to take proper measure to prevent any damage. Precedent case Whelan versus Fletcher established that a party can be held strictly liable when they bring onto their land something likely to cause harm, even if the act was carried out by another, such as a contractor. In such cases, the duty remains non-delegable.
My name is Dang Safrina, and I will be the one to conclude the issues 1 for our presentation. To conclude issue 1, it is important to highlight that employer can still be held liable for damages even if the work was carried out by an independent contractor. This applies particularly when the activities involved carry a special risk of damage or the nature of the work itself is likely to cause harm. In such cases, the employer cannot simply avoid liability, arguing that precautions were delegated to someone else. The law expects employers to remain responsible in situations where the work is inherently dangerous or extra care is clearly required. This principle ensures that victims are protected and that responsibility is not easily shifted away from those in control. So, moving on to issues 2, the question is where the liability should be joining share among the remaining defendant as joint tortfeasor. Based on the facts, the answer is yes. The first and second, fourth, and the fifth defender are considered jointly liable as they were involved in the acts that caused the damage. However, the third defendant, who is the architect, is excluded from liability. This is because there was no sufficient evidence showing their direct involvement or contribution to the wrongful act. In conclusion, liability is shared only among those who are actively participate in or contribute to the harm caused. That's all. Thank you.
In this case, the first and second defendants who acted as the employers are held strictly liable. This is because they failed to properly supervise and manage the construction work done by the independent contractor. Since the nature of the work was inherently dangerous pose foreseeable risk to nearby properties, their duty of care is considered non-deligible. That means, even if they hired someone else to do the work, they are still responsible for making sure it's done safely. At the same time, the fourth and fifth defendants, the independent contractor and the civil engineer, are found directly liable for negligence. Their failure to carry out the work properly caused real damage to the plaintiff's property, such as structural cracks and soil movement. This situation reflects the legal concept of joint tortfeasance, where more than one party contributes to a single wrongful act or harm. Meanwhile, the third defendant, the architect, is not held responsible in this case. The court found no sufficient evidence proving the architect had any role in the construction errors or failed in their duties. Therefore, liability is limited to the parties who directly or indirectly contributed to the damage through their actions or lack of supervision.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Nur Ashal Safir, so I will explain about the precedent case. The precedent case really is Lim Efa v. Sedimaju Padu Sindian Berhad. This case shows that more than one party can be held jointly liable when their combined negligence caused to the damage for the property. In Lim Efa, the court found that several parties, including the developer, contractor, and engineer, all contribute to the serious construction defect and therefore share a legal responsibility. By referring to Lim Efa, liability should not rest on just one defendant, but should be shared among all parties involved, based on the doctrine of joint tortfeasance. This ensures that accountability is fairly distributed. For the conclusion for this second issue, I would like to emphasize that liability should be distributed among all defendants whose action or omissions contribute to the damage. This reflects the legal doctrine of joint tortfeasance, which allow multiple parties to be held responsible together. By doing so, it ensures fair accountability and protect plaintiff from being undercompensated. especially in cases where the damage was caused by more than one party.